The Kabbalah addresses a fundamental paradox, which is found in many religious traditions, which is if God is holy, if God is separate, which is the definition of Kedusha in Hebrew, if God is beyond this world, purely non-material, how do we relate to the divine in our material existence, in this world of our material being, our physical selves? And that paradox is addressed in the Kabbalah. It's addressed through a system called the 10 Sefirot. And to give the background, we talked about how the Kabbalist concept is of the world being within the divine, of God being the place of the world, God constricting his presence to leave room for the world. And yet at the same time, the kav, the ray of light, the or Ein Sof, the light from that which is beyond, comes into this world. The metaphor used is emanation, like light coming off a candle. It spreads out. And the light itself, is it the candle? Is it the fire? No, because otherwise you would be burnt. And God tells Moshe, Eishel Chelati, that I'm a consuming fire, that we can't experience God directly. But yet the light, which is beyond the flame, can we say it's not the flame at all? No, in some sense, it's still connected to the flame, or it's still an aspect of the flame being emanated out through the beams of light. And so we understand in the system of the Kabbalah, the light emanating out from the divine is the divine coming into this world, the Or Ein Sof, the light of the beyond. Yet, that light is too powerful. It's too overwhelming to experience directly. So through a system and of the Sefirot, which we can compare to a prism, when a white light is shown through a prism, it diffracts into the 7 colors of the rainbow. Similarly, one can understand that the light of the Or Ein Sof coming into this world is diffracted in a sense through the Sefirot and made accessible to us. Now, what is the source? How do we know about these 10 Sefirot? So the earliest Kabbalistic source, which we've quoted before, the Sefer Yetzirah, the Book of Formation, says that there are 10 Sefirot of nothingness, blima, which shows us that they are purely spiritual. 10 and not 9, and we'll have to see why that is significant. 10 and not 9, meaning the divine is not one of the Sefirot. The upper Sefirot, the upper sphere of Keter, of crown, is not the divine itself. And 10 and not 11, we'll have to see about, is there an 11th Sefirah or is there not? Okay, now that is from the oldest work of Kabbalah, Sefer Yetzirah. Is there a mention in the Bible, in the Torah itself, of the 10 Sefirot? So here we have a speech of King David to the Jewish people. It's actually found in the Daily Prayer Book. And it says, "To you, God, are greatness, might, splendor, triumph, and majesty. Yes, all that is in heaven and on earth. To you, Lord, belong kingship and preeminence above all." If you look at it in the Hebrew, you will notice that the terms used for these qualities of God that King David is talking about are code words for the different Sefirot. L'cha Hashem Hagedula, v'Hagvura, HaTiferet, HaNetzav HaChod, Ki Kol, and Kol as well, B'Shemayim, Uvaretz L'cha Hashem, HaMamlacha, and that's Malchut, that's kingship. So we're going to see how each of these correspond to one of the Sefirot. Now, when we talk about qualities of the divine or midot, aspects of the divine, of course, we're not talking about God, him or her or itself. We can't know God. God does not have human qualities. But God does impact on the world and on our lives. And so we recognize in God's interactions in the world these qualities In moments of war, when we feel God is on our side, God is a man of war. The Midrash tells us that's gvura, that's strength, that's power, and netzach, victory. And then sometimes we feel God's love, the chesed, the goodness, God giving to us, God bringing bounty in our lives. So we experience God's qualities in how he interacts with us. And if you think about it, another person, people who we're close to, people, our loved ones, do we really experience them? We're not inside their heads. So we can't know firsthand their consciousness. But we experience them through the way they act with us, the way they express themselves with us, through their faces. And sure enough, one of the blessings that the Kohanim give is Yaher Hashem panav elecha v'yichuneka. May God shine his face upon you. And Nachmanides says that is the light of the Shekhinah, the light of the divine, the light of the bottom Sefirah. So what are the Sefirot? What does Sefirah mean? So there are different takes on what Sefirah means. Sefirah can come from the word mispar, which is numbers, right? The 10 numbers. Sefirah can be sapir, sapphire. When Moses is on Mount Sinai, it says the ground was like a sapphire under him, illuminated. So it's the illumination of God. It's the light of God, and the luminescence is described like a sapphire. Or it can be a sipur. It could be the heavens declare God's glory. So it's a telling over of the divine qualities. We're going to call them Sefirot for practicality's sake. Now, the 10 Sefirot you see on the left are often diagrammed in this way, top to bottom. They're sometimes called the tree of life. Sometimes they're overlaid with a human form, and we're going to have to talk about how these different Sefirot correspond to different parts of the human body. And they start at the top with Keter, which is crown, Chachma and Bina, wisdom and understanding. And we're going to see that the top 3 are really, in a sense, like the divine head, the divine consciousness, if you will, God's brain. And we don't really have access to those. The bottom 7 are the ones we're really going to be focusing upon. Dat is the 11th, and we'll have to talk about that, how that fits in. The bottom 7 are Chesed, Gvur, and Tiferet, kindness, strength, and beauty. So the right side, the left side, and then the middle. Netzach, Hod, and Yesod, victory, splendor, and foundation. And then the bottom is going to be Malchut, kingship, which is also known as Shekhinah. So that is the arrangement of the 10. Now, before we get into them, this diagramming of the Sefirot is an ancient practice, which goes back to the early Middle Ages. In fact, there's a book called The Kabbalistic Tree. It's a beautiful book with pictures of many of these different drawings of these trees, from the most simple, the one you see in front of you, diagramming simply the arrangement with the names within them, like the colored one we showed you. This is from Italy in the 1500s. And here you have one of the most complex, with 33,000 words, where they use the diagram as a structure on which to overlay teachings and understandings of the Sefirot. Also Italian 1500s. This is anonymous and quite the work. So there's a whole history of this diagramming of the Sefirot. Now we come to the 10. So my teacher, Rabbi Yitzchak Schwartz, helps to teach these Sefirot as consciousnesses, as states of consciousness in the world, because, and we are enjoined to go in God's ways. Holechta b'drachav, and going in God's ways, the Talmud tells us, just like he is merciful, we should be merciful. So it tells us that we are meant to try and embody these divine qualities. So we're going to look at each, and we're going to try and identify what would be the qualities that we are to embody if we live those ourselves. So we're understanding the Sefirot in a divine level and in a human level as well. And really, Hasidic teachings are about bringing Kabbalistic ideas and applying them to our lives and to how they can help us to grow as spiritual beings in our service of God. So we're going to focus on this array, and the Kabbalists also identified them as different parts of the human body, as we mentioned. This picture is overlaid with Leonardo da Vinci's drawing of the human being, quite famous one. It has since the last couple of years been shown by the most prominent Italian biographer of da Vinci that he, in fact, was Jewish. And his mother was a Jewish slave who was sold to an Italian merchant in Florence. And here you see the array over the human body, which we will talk about at greater length. Now, also, we have to make a note that the Sefirot we're going to do from top to bottom, but there's a dynamic that occurs between all of the different Sefirot. And those are called Partsufim. They are manifestations of divine energies as they combine together in the array. And just to be aware that we are going to look at the most basic understanding of the system, but in the Kabbalistic books, in the Zohar and others, it unveils a system which is infinitely more complex. In the Kabbalah of the Ari, each Sefirah includes within it the other 10. So that becomes even more complex. Okay, so let's start with the bottom 7. And we're going to look at them as triads, as triangles. The top of the bottom 7 is Chesed, Gvura, and Tiferet. And if you want to use Rabbi Schwartz's experiencing of what these manifest as, we can call them mushrooming, withholding, and harmonizing. Now, what is Chesed? Chesed is the right side. It is the expansion. Chesed means to do good deeds or to be giving. It's embodied, each of these is going to be embodied by one of the patriarchs. And it says the patriarchs, in fact, didn't just live it, but Hamerkava, they actualized that Sefirah, that divine energy, and channeled it into the world. So Abraham was the paradigm of Chesed, of givingness. The iconic scene of Abraham standing at his tent with all of the doors open, bringing guests in, feeding them, taking care of their every need. Chesed is goodness. Chesed is giving. We're told, the rabbis say, that Olam Chesed Yibaneh, the world was created through goodness, through God's goodness, and is the primary divine quality. The Chesed person is charitable, is giving, is expansive, is pure goodness emanating out. But we're going to see that each of these can also have a weakness. Because the person who is all love and no boundaries, which is going to be Gvura, the withholding, person who's all love and no boundaries, that person can be overextend themselves. They can lose themselves. They can be a person who becomes codependent. They can be a person who gives without evaluating what the person needs. And that can be very destructive, or it can be misplaced, or it can be disappointing to the person hoping to receive. On the other hand, on the left side, and by the way, just to talk about right and left, I view these as typologies. We talked about typologies before. If a person is a lefty and their strong hand is their left hand, in a sense, that is what the rabbis would call their right hand. It's the hand of giving. It's the hand of extension. So for our purposes, we're going to talk about the left side here, is Gvura. Now, Gvura is translated as strength or power, but it also reflects din and judgment. It also reflects the left arm. It reflects Isaac. And if you look at Isaac as a biblical personality, he didn't have the charisma of his father. The thousands of followers that Abraham had seem nowhere to be found in the times of Isaac. But Isaac had the strength of the internal. It says that his wife, Rebecca, when she first saw him, he was out in the field. He was lasuach basadi. He was meditating out in the fields. The Gevurah person has strong boundaries. The Gevurah person can protect themselves and sometimes isolate themselves from the world around them so they can focus upon the inner life and have a very rich inner life. That person knows when to withhold, and when giving to a person might be destructive. You can kill a person with love, right? I've had the experience of a person who's addicted, and you think you're helping them by supporting them, and then you find out it's just enabling them to fall deeper into their addiction. So sometimes tough love is needed, and that the rabbis talk about the gvura and the chesed, the discipline and the love, and the chesed and the gvura, the love in the discipline, right? Sometimes the love is to say no to our children, or to say no to someone who needs boundaries, or when we need boundaries ourselves. And so unbridled love can fall into chaos. On the other hand, gvura in excess can be overly disciplinarian, can be overbearing, can be judgmental, can be critical, can be too withdrawn and self-isolating, and that can be destructive as well. Now, the combining of chesed and gvura is tiferet, which is often translated as beauty. It can be charisma, it can be compassion. It is the merging of chesed and gvura. It's the proper balance between the two. Where now, what is beauty? Classical aesthetics is diversity with a unity that binds it all together. And through that unity in the disparate parts, we find a beauty because it has a common theme throughout. At least in classical art. Modern art has gone in a different direction. But that's the harmonizing. That's the balancing the different parts and creating a whole with them. And in a sense, we're going to see that the middle line, the kav, the line in the middle, doesn't always have its own identity. It's a matter of blending the two sides in a way in which works, and that has a, as we say, a beauty to it in and of itself. That Tiferet is characterized by Jacob, by Yaakov, the forefather, who in a sense started out as an Isaac. He was pure, sitting in tents, very internal, and he evolved into more of an Abraham figure who was in the world, who was applying his ideals and his beliefs in his everyday life and merged the two to blend them into the great patriarch who eventually was renamed Israel. So that is the first triad. We're now going to move to the next three, and which are Netzach, Hod, and Yesod. Overcoming, enabling, and communicating. What is Netzach? Netzach is victory. Netzach is embodied by Moshe, Moses, who led the Jewish people, who directed them, often disciplined them. It's leadership that projects out and onto the other. And so Netzach can help guide someone. Netzach can be giving the right advice and even prodding a person towards making the right decisions. The second triad is more about the interaction. It's not just the quality, it's the quality as we apply it outside of us. So it's taking that chesed, that mushrooming, and impacting other people with it. And that's ultimately what a leader is. It's impacting the others, directing them, giving direction, guidance. In its negative manifestation, of course, it can be controlling, it can be overbearing, and it can be not leave room for the person and for who they are themselves. We all know of totalitarian regimes that suppress people and that control them in order to, in a sense, be victorious over them. But if it's channeled in the right way, it can be, it can create greatness. A leader can lead an entire people to greatness, as Moshe tried to do with the Jewish people. On the other hand, on the left side, you have Aaron, embodying Hod. What is it? Enabling can have negative connotations, but we're not talking about a negative enabling that we were mentioning before, where you enable a person to do negative things. Enabling is where you can hold back, where you can make yourself secondary. You can be supportive of a person, but leave them room to actualize who they really are. And it said when Aaron died, the people mourned for 30 days. Aaron was the most beloved because the people felt like he supported them, but in a way which allowed them to be themselves. Now, the negative side was the transgression of the golden calf, where the people were going off in the wrong direction, and Aaron didn't put a stop to it. The commentaries say he gathered the gold to delay them, but or so he could oversee it, but in the end, it led to disaster. So enabling without direction can also be a problem and can lead to negative implications. Netzach is the right leg, Hod is the left leg, and the third of the triad is Yesod. Yesod is the phallus, it's the genitalia, particularly the male. It is embodied by Joseph, who mastered his sexual drive when he was not seduced by Potiphar, his master's wife. It is also communicating, which makes sense in terms of the sexual organ. It's the bottom of the six before Malchut. So in a sense, all of the qualities come into this Yesod, and it communicates it down to the next level. So Yesod is the balance of how to impact upon the world with enough netzach and enough hod, with direction and yet leaving room, and effectively communicating to the other. And that's what a good communicator is. They know their audience and they know how to balance what their message is with their audience. The final of the Sefirot, the bottom one, sometimes associated with the feet, is known by two names. It's known by Malchut, which is kingship, and the patriarch embodying it is King David. But it's also known as Shekhinah, which means the divine presence, and which is the feminine. Why is that? Because if we look at each of these as a vessel, holding this quality, Malchut is the vessel that receives them all. And that's where we see the feminine. Now, when we're talking about the feminine, once again, we're talking about typologies. The feminine is the receiving. This feminine is the receiving, the overflowing, and then the sharing. And why is the feminine the receiving? Well, simply biologically, the male penetrates and the female receives. And in fact, the Kabbalists use language of unification, and the Tiferet and Yesod being the male, unifying with the female, and that unity of intercourse activates the spiritual energy of all the Sefirot to come down into the world. And they're all modulated through Malchut and Shekhinah. So in a sense, Malchut, Shekhinah is the divine presence that we can experience in this world. It's the light of God coming into this world. And in fact, we're told that in the temple, when the Kohanim, when the priests would give the blessing, they would hold up their hands like this. And yes, for you Star Trek people, Leonard Nimoy Spock his father was a Kohen, he was a Kohen, so he saw this, and he used it for live long and prosper, for the greeting. But back to the temple, it says when you were not supposed to look at the hands of the Kohanim because the Shekhinah, the divine light, would shine through their fingers and could be damaging. Now, was it real light? Was it physical light? According to some, according to one opinion in the Zohar, it was, and it could damage you. The other opinion is that it wasn't physical light, it was divine light. And if you've ever had the experience of seeing someone, we say their face is glowing, right? A woman who's pregnant has that glow. A great tzaddik, a righteous person whose face is beaming, whose eyes have a twinkle in them. Is that physical light? No, it's not physical light. Yet we use these metaphors because we really do feel like they're shining and beaming. So that is the Shekhinah. That's the light of the Shekhinah, the divine light coming into this world. And our goal is to come close to the Almighty by come into God's presence and feel that light coming into our lives, feel that light coming into our souls and filling us up with God's love and with God's energy. And the Malchut, which means kingship, is also used. We said King David is the patriarch of this final Sefirah. Why is it Malchut? Now, it's hard for us to relate to kingship because it's mostly an institution which is either just a figurehead like the King of England, and we view negatively on kingship, which oftentimes was too autocratic. But kingship implies you can't be a king without a nation. So the kingship is the dimension of the divine that interacts with the world, that directs the world. That is God's kingship. And the description of it would be resulting. It would be bringing it into the world, bringing the godliness into the world, experiencing it, feeling its direction, and that would be Malchut and Shekhinah. Now, we're going to go back to the top three, and we'll talk about them very briefly, because in a sense, we're told that we can't connect with the top Sefirot. They're in the divine realm. They don't emanate into the world in the same way. Yet, we can characterize them as states of consciousness. We can use those divine qualities, so to speak, to teach us about our own consciousness. So the top one, Keter, would be Godding. That is simply, on the highest level, the Kabbalists talk about Radla, Ratzon Delo Yada, the will that is not known. It's the unknowable. We know there's a divine will, but we can't identify it. The next aspect of Keter is Tanug, which Rabbi Schwartz talks about, grooving. It means being in the moment. And the rabbis talk about God playing with the world or God having fun. What does that mean? We don't know. But we do know that when we're in that zone, the zone of we're in the moment, we're connecting, we feel connected to ourselves, it's simply just being in the present. And the third level is the Ratzon, the will. And the highest form that we can try and talk about God is simply to talk about God's will, to talk about God impacting the world. If you want to draw an analogy to building a house, so the next one is Chachma, wisdoming, and Bina, packaging. So it'd be, first you have the desire to have the house. Then you have the Chachma. Chachma is conception, it's visualization, it's a flash of insight, it's a vision, it's more right brain. So first you have that vision of what the house is. You have a picture of it in your mind. And then you have to break it down to figure out, how am I going to build this? How am I going to actualize it? What are the different elements to it that I need to put together? Bina comes from the word to build, it's comprehension, building, and the packaging. So those are ways, states of consciousness we can try and relate to as divine qualities. Now, we talked about the unifications of the Sefirot, and according to the Kabbalists, when we do a mitzvah, when we say Kiddush Friday night, it activates these Sefirot, it creates unities between them, which then open up the flow of divine light. The Kabbalists use the language of Tzinorot, of tubes or piping, bringing the divine light and energy into the world. And that can be activated from the human realm as well, according to the Kabbalists. So Tiferet would be Kadosh Baruch Hu, the masculine. Malchut, Shechina, would be the bottom one, the feminine. Yesod obviously is masculine as well, and it's the unifications which are talked about very much by the Kabbalists between the Sefirot, which activate the divine energy to flow into this world. And so by trying to embody these qualities of God's givingness and God's discipline and leadership and enabling and support, we aspire to bring God's light into the world by embodying those divine qualities, living them, and activating the energies so that the world can be a world full of godliness. And so ultimately, the tzimtzum of God's removing his presence, our job in this world is to bring the divine light back in, by connecting to that light, which will activate it and bring it into this world. And it's kind of a back and forth, up and down process, that the more we bring it in, the more divine light can be activated. The more we elevate ourselves, the more light we bring in to the world. We should all merit to do that, and may these teachings inspire us to do that more.